Hello, everybody. Welcome to The Works. I'm Keith Williams, your host. Hope everybody is doing okay. And we got another great show for you today. And here at The Works, anything goes. We talk about just about anything and everything as long as it doesn't violate any rules or something like that. Okay, so with that being said, we have a great guest with us today. Her name is Jenna Green, and she is an award-winning young adult fantasy author. She obviously written a lot of books. Here, we're going to be talking about that today. Hi, Jenna.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Um, you first of all, let everyone know who you are.
Yeah, well, you kind of already said it, but my name's Jenna Green, and I'm a YA fantasy author, a children's author, and I'm a teacher. So I stay quite busy.
And here's some fun facts about Jenna. Besides being a teacher and an author, her hobbies include dancing, dragon boating. I have no idea what that is. One of her novels, which we will be talking about here, is called Reborn. Uh, Won the Moonbeam Children's Book Award for 2019. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And also have a couple of other books here. So let's get right into it. What was your inspiration for writing, and what authors have inspired you to write your own books?
Um, I think I've always been a storyteller. Um, and then, with a little encouragement from a few teachers along the way, it gave me the idea that this is something I could do. I think lots of people have stories in them, but it's a not the easiest industry. It's not a set path. It's not like my teaching career where you go to university and they tell you what courses to take, and then they teach you in the classroom, and then you get a job, hopefully. Writing's a lot different in that, you can talk to 10 authors and they're going to have 10 different paths and 10 different stories. So you have to have a lot of faith in yourself because you're going to get a lot of rejection. And then after that rejection, you're going to get more rejection. So somewhere along the line, someone told me that, I had a nugget, a spark, and I'm sure there's more people than me that have happened to, but I had stories I wanted to tell. I still do. There's still more coming. And I had and have that faith that, I can do this. And then the more I write, the better I get. So, if you go back to some of the stuff I was writing in my early 20s, it's not so good, but the only way to get better at it is to write. And I think just being a kid and being a storyteller. I mean, my sister on car rides was miserable. She was bored, she was tired, she was sick. My mom said I could have like my three little She-Ra action figures and I'd be good for days because I would just create up stories and create scenarios. And, even at bedtime with my pound puppy and my Cabbage Patch dolls, plots and subplots and adventures. And if you have that in you, then you have a story to tell. Now you just have to go about the work and actually put it on paper. And I think my mom was a storyteller too. She never wrote a word, but man, did she tell a story. And I remember my husband saying, "How come our stories change?" I'm like, "Well, of course." He's like, "But I think they're real stories." I'm like, "With a twist, you got to please your audience. So if it ain't getting the right vibe, she's gonna change the ending." But he didn't really always understand that. But that's what a storyteller is. And so I'm just the descendant of my mom. She was a storyteller out loud, and I'm through words. And so it's a complex journey and a complex question to answer on how do you become inspired and where do you get your ideas from and how do you become an author? Because it's not point A to point B, it's point A to Z to 9 to square root of 6.
Any,
But
any,
we're there now.
any, any like authors that you kind of look up to that kind of like inspire you to write?
I don't know if I could pinpoint like one. I know a lot of people do. They're like, this one author changed my world, or this one author changed my world. But I think all of them. I think everything I've ever read, every piece of children's literature, every YA book I ever read. I ironically, I'm a fantasy author, and when I was a kid, I didn't read a whole lot of fantasy, other than Lord of the Rings. I mean, Harry Potter wasn't even out yet when I started writing. So, but every piece of writing gives me ideas, plots, sentence structure. Ah, you know, I mean, Jane Austen, I've never written anything like her, but I love Elizabeth Bennet and that strong character, or characters that can grow. Um, She-Ra was a cartoon, but man, did I take a lot of fighting for Etheria and um, fighting battles in an imaginative world with imaginative creatures, right? Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park has inspired that love of adventure in me. So every book I read and every book I continue to read, and I'm a little bit eclectic, right? I'll go from YA fantasy to nonfiction or whatever, um, helps along the way.
What would you say that your audience, who would consider to be your audience?
Well, YA is a little interesting because even though I write for teens, um, statistically more adults read YA than the actual YA audience, or at least it's equal. And that's the thing. Just because your character's young doesn't mean your readers always have to be. My niece started reading these books before she was a teen, and my friends read them now, and we're all in our little 40s, 30s, and 40s. Uh, it's the joy of YA is that you've got that nugget of youth and innocence, and so you have these characters that are going through inner turmoil and then outer turmoil, and you can do a lot with them. But that doesn't mean your audience has to be that same age. It's just that idea of you're on the brink of something. You're on the brink of adulthood or the brink of change. And that's a wonderful age to write about. And that's a wonderful theme to write about and expand on.
So is it like your writing's geared towards teenage boys or teenage girls or both?
I write a lot about female characters because I am a female. That doesn't mean that boys won't enjoy my books or can't enjoy my books. There's a lot of strong male characters in them too, but um, I've just those are the characters that pop into my head. The main characters, the main protagonists. They're women. They're either strong women or feisty women or women that don't see themselves as either, but go through um, circumstance and become strong and become feisty and become independent and learn along the way.
Um, has uh, has writing books geared towards teenagers have changed from, let's say, from the 80s and 90s, to today. So for example, in the 80s and 90s, uh you had, the Sweet Valley High novel.
You had Sweet Valley High and you had Babysitters Club, and that was pretty much it. Maybe get some Fear Street in there when you're a little bit older, but the literature wasn't as rich back then, or if it was, it was harder to find. And not to say I didn't love my Babysitters Club, but I never really got into Sweet Valley High or even Sweet Valley Twins. And so, you know, everyone thinks I was a huge reader when I was a kid, and I definitely read, but had the literature that's available now for teens been available then, oh, I would have been just it would have gone so much smoother than me trying to read Les Miserables when I was 12. It didn't go well because I just wasn't ready for that. So the idea that now we have so many options, there's YA fantasy and YA science fiction and YA contemporary and all these avenues. And then you can read the adult books and you can read the children's book. It's expanded so much beyond just, you have like this, or you got nothing.
Wow, because I mean that was like a popular book series for teenage girls, back in the day, you
Oh,
know.
my sister read them all, absolutely. And I
You
read
know,
some Nancy Drew, but I like the Hardy Boys better. But
oh yeah, I
you were
forgot
still
about
limited.
them.
You
Nancy
got about
Drew and the Hardy
Nancy and
Boys.
the Hardy Boys.
I forgot about them. Yeah, but wasn't too much of that, going around in the 70s and 80s and like
Where
early
was your
90s.
YA fantasy? You had to read Lord of the Rings or Terry Brooks.
Not when I was growing up. There wasn't too many options for teenagers. That really didn't come out to the 90s, the early 90s that you started to have uh literature just geared towards teens. I guess it was mostly like TV shows, that we look forward to that feature young characters like The Facts of Life, the Different Strokes, Growing Pains, stuff like that. Beverly Hills 90210, of course, stuff like that. But as far as literature is concerned, not too much. So,
No, and if
uh,
you like the speculative stuff, right? You don't want to just watch the family show, the Roseanne and or ER and the medical stuff. You had Star Trek, which was amazing. Oh. But you didn't have it. You could watch Alf and you could watch then you had to wait for Buffy, but by then half of you were out of high school, right?
yeah,
So even the TV shows that were geared towards YA, you didn't have that speculative, that fantasy option, or not as
no,
many of them.
no. I mean, no, and there wasn't even any like cartoons that geared towards teenagers neither, back in the day as well. I guess that started like in the mid 90s, but by that time, I was either in college or out of college. So wasn't so many like entertainment, options for us. So, back in my day. So we just basically spent a lot of time, outside, and your mom be like, you know, you need to be in this house before the lights come,
Yeah.
that type of thing. And, we'll be outside all day and your parents won't let you in the house until the lights come. So we basically spend the majority of our time, outside, basically, with the exception of, on weekends where, we get to eat a bowl of cereal and watch cartoons all day. So it wasn't a lot of options, for us as far as, literature is concerned, even though, back in my day that uh, the teachers and librarians, they did encourage us, to read, but there wasn't a lot of options, books that geared towards young people. You had your children's books, uh, anything that's, below, I say about 12 or 13, they definitely have options. All throughout time, you always have, children's books, but nothing for teens. So in your own words or opinion, how did that come about? So when did we really started to see literary works, geared towards teenagers?
I think I think well, I don't want to be cliche, but I think Harry Potter definitely had a start, and it was a children's book, but as the series evolved, it really became closer to that YA as the characters grew up. In terms of other literature, I know The Hunger Games was a big thing. Now that was 2000s, but it was still quite an influence.
So let's get into your actual work. So you have Reborn and Renew. Reborn and Renew. So what is that about?
Sorry. So Reborn is about a 16-year-old girl, and she has marks on her skin. And hold on.
And why we are kind of like on a little break here. Oh, never mind. And we also have a book called Winston the Womack. The
The
Womack.
well-dressed wombat, yeah.
Okay, so we'll talk about that last. So let's get back to uh the two books, Reborn and Reborn.
So Reborn, we have a girl named Lexel, and she's 16, and she is sold into slavery based on the marks on her skin. And what those mean is that she has been reborn. She has lived previous lives. Now, whether this is factual or whether it's a myth, we don't know until later in the book, and I can't give too much away. But she's sold into slavery, and she is taken to a plantation and taken to work. And then the complicated thing is that she defines herself as very docile, very accepting. She doesn't like her circumstance, but it is what it is, and that's just what it is. And but then she's also very protective. She helped raise her younger brother, and she her baby brother. And so when she's sold into slavery, she's sold with a 5-year-old girl named Sira, and Sira's put into danger more than just, I mean, slavery itself is horrendous, but she's put into a very dire predicament. And so Lexel has to step up and has to act and to save this little girl. And she ends up escaping with her and a double board named Finn, and they have to escape to through the wastelands, which is not a very nice place, as the name would dictate. And she so they have to go through all these, they have to escape. If you're an escaped slave, people want you back, and they have to flee, and they have to hide, and they have to see if they can make it to safety. And of course, along the way, the reader is finding out on whether this idea of being reborn is real or if it's a myth. And then in the second book, without giving too much away, um, she left. I mean, she left slavery, and other people weren't as lucky, right? She left people behind, and that guilt stays with her of what do you do? You're maybe safe, but they're maybe not. And this whole idea of slavery just doesn't seem right, whether it's based on truth or whether it's based on falsehood. It's not right. So she has to go through a lot. And then the third book's in edits right now, and so it should be coming out within the year of more choices of what she's going to do about this horrendous system.
Um, so what are the themes that are coming out of this book?
Well, you have obviously slavery and equality, um, the width that she hears and the memory mark she has is a connection to the past. And whether that's true or not, that's a beautiful thing, that you have a history and your identity is tied into all the people that have come before you and all the people that have followed behind. And then the idea of what you can do, what you should do, and what you must do, bravery and sacrifice, um, and the darkness within you and the darkness without. There's so many horrific but beautiful themes in there.
Yesterday had an opportunity to go to this museum where it was a detailed history of slavery, like 400 plus years. And I must say that that place was extremely creepy, very creepy. The displays that they had was, it was like real life, like, you're in another world. Like you're actually transported back in time, to where some cruel and inhumane and horrible things happen to millions of, uh, of African Americans. And it was like a really creepy place. It like freaked me out, like, I just stepped into hell. And it took me a while to kind of process, that experience. And I was like, the way that my ancestors has been treated is was really hard for me to, it was really hard for me to process. And I said to myself that I have visited once, that will be the first and only time that I will visit that museum. I can't take it. It's too much. It's too much for my emotions and my heart to handle. And so that kind of brings me back to, this story, that, you have written. Obviously, a lot of realism is displayed. And I really think that people should read this book, among other things. Um, yeah, I just had to get that out of my chest. Is there anything else you want to say about this book before we go on to the next one?
Just that there is a darkness to it in that, if you're writing about slavery, there are going to be pretty horrible things in there. Of course, it's written for a YA audience, so some of it is off scene, more hinted at, but I mean, she's a slave, she's abused, she's treated like nothing, like property. Um, but it's like those museums. I've been to the Holocaust Museum in Germany, and it is horrific and it is nauseating and it is heart-wrenching, but it's also important not to forget, and it's important to visit those places and know, um, especially if you weren't part of it, so that so that it doesn't happen again. And if you were part of it, then it might take, another 400 years to process it. Um, so, my aunt read this book, and she is a chipper ball of sunshine, and there was a few parts she struggled with, but she she found it very important, and that also it highlighted a lot of the positives. Not that there's positives to slavery, but the positives of people willing to say that it's not okay. And there's a lot of allusions to the Underground Railroad. And obviously, this is a fantasy book, so it is not historical in any means, but that idea that there's a path to freedom, there's help along the way. We call them stopovers in this book, and there's mystical qualities to it, but that there's a way out, and that there's a group of people willing to say, this isn't okay, and we will help you.
So even though you mentioned that this was a fantasy book, would you say there's some realism?
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely. You'll catch the illusions pretty easily. I mean, the setting isn't super far fetched. There's no dragons, there's no wizards. It could easily be North America, just with different foliage. Um, and the mystical aspects, it's kind of that low fantasy. They're very subtle, and they're really just to help you think about how people are the same and how people are different, and how the differences don't matter, and the similarities give you a lot of power.
and and we're about to get into something that is controversial. Here, you have a lot of books that have been banned, for whatever reason, and then there's this myth that critical race theory is being taught in our schools. and that which is a lie. I never even heard of CRT until I got to college. Uh, and then there's this thing called divisive concepts, where they're taking things out where supposedly, are dividing people. But we have gotten to that point, long before we even have a conversation, about those things. And technically, because, people refuse to read and study and listen to the dark history that is America. It wasn't all bad roses, and I refuse to believe, to paint this picture that America is all bad and roses. That's a lie, and that's the stuff that they want teachers to teach their kids in schools, and I'm like, you teaching a lie, a lie, so that these kids can grow up to live a life that is a lie. It is absolutely terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And it's about time that we face the truth, whether you like it or whether people like it or not. American history is not all beds and roses. You got the good, you got the bad, and you got the ugly. And I think that we need to revisit all three, so that we don't repeat some of that stuff. And whether whether a book is fiction or nonfiction, whether it's have realism or symbolism, or fantasy. Uh, yeah, there's always something in there that is going to grab our attention. And by nature, we are always curious minded. So I just have to throw that commentary, in here, because mainstream media is not going to address this at all. That's why you have podcasts like mine, because I am not afraid. I am not afraid to speak the truth. I am not afraid to say, okay, well, let's go there. I'm not afraid to do that, because I believe wholeheartedly that people need to know the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And we need to get out of our comfort zone. But we hide in the cave.
I think that I don't know, I'm Canadian. We definitely have banned books. We definitely have our own issues with residential schools. Um, but every time I see lists of banned books, I'm like, I'm pretty sure I've read almost all of them, and all of them have changed my lives. But I remember teaching seventh grade, and I was a student teacher, and I was student teaching at a Catholic school, and my TA had recommended that I teach the slave dancer. It's about a boy who's kidnapped, and he has to play his instrument on the slave ships when they bring the captives up on deck for exercise. And I can't remember the author, but it's a very famous book, an award-winning book. And I remember the girls in the class coming to me and saying, we don't want to read this book. It makes me uncomfortable. And I said, that's good. And they said, well, does that mean we're not going to read it anymore? I said, no, it should make you uncomfortable. It should make you feel icky inside. If you read this book and you're feeling happy, there's something wrong with you. But just because this book makes us uncomfortable doesn't mean we shouldn't read it. It probably makes it more important that we read it. To Kill a Mockingbird should make you feel icky at times. Handmaid's Tale should make you feel very disturbed at times. The Hate You Give should not make you feel warm and fuzzy. But hopefully at the end you've learned something. And some books are for knowledge and some for entertainment. And I would argue all of them are both. It's just degrees and what you're ready for. Um, but to ban a book, I'm not for it. I teach young kids, right? I teach 6 and 7-year-olds, but I used to teach the teens. And the thing about censorship is that you won't, if you're not ready for it, you won't get it. So if you're 11 and you're reading a book meant for a 20-year-old, the parts that your parents might be like, oh, I don't want you reading that, you won't understand it. You won't understand it till you're ready for it. And if you're ready for it, you should read it. And that's what makes censorship so complicated. If you don't get it, and that banning books and censorship, it it's not necessary, and that we should have books that make us feel uncomfortable, and that's what's important. That's literature, and you can do it with dragons on in the story, and you can do it with hobbits, and you can do it with just cars and people. But powerful literature, good literature, quality literature will have all those aspects. It'll have multitudes of themes, and it'll make you think. Hopefully, it's a good story and you're going, "Oh no, what'll happen next?" And you want to turn the page and it's adventure and how did the character manage this? But also underneath, maybe where you're not noticing, you're also thinking.
Right. Because, of course, back in my day, when I was, in grade school, was a teenager, critical thinking was, a thing, Um, I mean, I remember taking the, creative writing, classes, in high school and college. And, the whole point is, number one, tell your story. Not only tell your story, but you write it in such a way that, get people to think. But now, when you talk about censorship, and all, those things, I refuse to allow anybody to tell me what I can and cannot write. I don't care what law is in the books. You're not going to stop me, from doing that. Because if that was the case, I might as well be a robot.
It's important to know your audience though, and I kill off characters, but I also know I'm writing for teens, so it's more like they got stabbed, they die. Versus, if I was writing for 40-year-olds, I might describe the blood and the gore and things like that. But the idea that you can't tackle serious issues like racism in kids' books or mortality. I mean, Bridge to Terabithia is written for third graders, but it's written in a way that's appropriate for that age. So all those themes can be tackled at young ages as long as you write it with an awareness of the language you use.
Right. And that's definitely takes skill. Um, Not sure if that exactly is being, taught. I'm not sure that's being taught in, creative writing. I mean, there's no formula or script to say, okay, this is how you become an author. There's not a one size fits all, type of thing. I mean, I don't think that you can go to school to be an author. No, just as much as you have to go to school to learn how to pray. That's ridiculous. Just utterly ridiculous. Okay, so you have a sequel to this book called Renew.
Yep. And then the third in the series will be Restore, and it'll be coming out soon.
Okay, so tell us about book two, Renew.
So Renew is, a little bit of a spoiler from the first one, but they make it to the unclaimed cities. And this is supposed to be a haven, a sanctuary, but things are a lot more complicated than initially. I mean, that's life. Life is far more complicated. And so this place has their own problems with how to manage supplies and how to survive day to day. They don't necessarily know everything that's happening on the other side of the country. And then Lexel has to deal with that guilt that she managed to escape with the help of a friend, but that friend who knows what happened to them. That girl's named Kita, and she actually plays a huge role in all three books. Even though she's only in the first book, she's affected Lexel's character and this idea that, well, what about the rest of the people? I'm pretty fortunate I've made it to somewhere of relative safety, but what about everyone else? And so it's really an onus to figure out what she should do now. And then, as with many teens, there's a little bit of a crush on someone, but they have very divisive ideas on how life should play out and how reborns should not how much they should be treated, but how they can interact with others. And so we've got some teenage angst going on a little bit in there too. But also Lexel's not just going to say, well, I like this boy, therefore I'm going to do whatever he says. It's more like, I like this boy. All right, this is what I got to do. He can come or not. So it's an interesting dynamic. Um, and what we go through the adventure of a first crush, um, and all the highs and lows of that while trying to change the world, which is hard enough as it is.
So would you say that the things in Rebirth are different than the things that are being displayed in your book Reborn?
I think I think a lot of them are the same or they overlap. It's just that they expand. Um, so family, the notion of family, um, or home, those all just the conversation is widened, and stereotyping and judging people, it shows that it can happen from a multitude of ways, and there's so many layers to it. And so the conversation is just widened by the second book, and by the third book you can really understand a lot of people's perspectives on all these issues, and what people are willing to do. I'm giving you a sneak peek of the third book, where Lexel meets some people, and they're in a place of relative safety, and she wants to push them for more. And they don't all want to. Some of them are like, yeah, we do deserve more. And some people say, I deserve more, but I also have finally found this, and this is safe, and this is comfortable, and this is reassuring, and this is my home, and I'm not willing to risk it. And she has to become okay with that their definition of freedom doesn't have to be your definition of freedom, and your definition of home doesn't have to be hers. And that, if you've been through so much trauma, you might not want to risk more. And so she comes off as very judgmental, and she has to realize that all this time people have been judging her, and she can't do the same. She shouldn't do the same. Otherwise, you're just part of the problem in a totally different way. So all the themes continue on, maybe a few are added, but honestly, it's just a wider conversation. It's like talking to two people, and then a third person and a fourth person joins in with their perspective. And then you get all sorts of things you hadn't considered before.
Um, what are some of the reactions and responses that you have gotten for people who read these books?
They like the sense of adventure. They like that it is fantasy, but it's not that really high fantasy, which I have written and I do like, and I read and I write. But it's a world very similar to our own in a lot of ways, either from our past or possibly in our future. And they like that it's easy to dive into this um, world, and be able to pick it up, and then just really be focusing on the characters and the events. But they also like those fantastical qualities that slip in, and the different monsters and villains that she has to fight, which are as much internal as external. That a lot of the characters are not perfect. There's a lot of characters that start out as enemies and become allies, or vice versa. Um, there's a lot of growth for every character, and it's wonderful to see when they succeed, and they get frustrated with me when the character doesn't, and I'm like, well, that's part of life. No one's going to always be on that upward incline of growth. You're going to have setbacks and step backs. um but a lot of they love a lot of cliffhangers at the end of every chapter, making you eager for what's next, and just characters that you can root for.
Uh, do you see your books being like maybe a movie or a TV series? Because it's definitely something different based on what you told me already.
I think they could be. Now, whether that's in the cards and whether that's in the stars, I don't know, but I definitely think they could be. There's a rich enough world, there's a rich enough characters, there's enough characters. There's a lot of things that don't happen in the book but are referred to. So if they wanted more meat for a TV series or something, there's definitely a lot there. What happened before these books and what might happen after. Um, it would be entertaining and it'd be thought provoking, and I think it would go well. I think it would do well.
Okay, so our next book here is called Winston the Well-Dressed Wombat. What's that one about?
He's a wombat and he's well dressed. Uh, he's got his own special sense of style that's unlike anyone else's, and he's okay. If he wants to wear a bowler hat and a tie and some cufflinks and mismatched socks, he's gonna do it. And he's gonna save the world through just being kind and through his
So
sense of fashion with a little bit of flair.
so this one is more geared towards younger kids.
This is a picture book. You know, my daughter's only 6 and she was 4 at the time that I wrote this, and she doesn't really understand the big books with the big words without the pictures. So this was something for her and I to enjoy together with pictures and, you know, a shorter adventure, and but it still has morals and themes that kindness is going to win out, and to be you, and it's okay to be different than everyone else as long as you're kind. Be true to you and be safe and kind, and that's all you need.
Yeah, that reminds me of, going to my local elementary school and, participate in the tutoring program for first and second graders. And they love those picture books. They can, pretty much create an analysis, just by looking at the pictures. So I thought that was unique, and it kind of like give them confidence to how shall I put this? It gives them the confidence to perfect their reading skills. So it kind of started them off with the picture books, and then move on to something, with a little bit more words, in it. And they're very like imaginative, when you show them a picture, they're very imaginative in how they will describe those pictures in the book. Okay, we're going to get ready to close here, but uh, tell everybody where they can get a hold of you, or they want to purchase your books, or they have a question. How can they get in touch?
So my website's being redone right now, but it's jennagreen.ca if you give it a couple weeks before we find it. But I'm all over social media. Jenna Green with an E on the end. And my Twitter and my TikTok handle are both at J Green Writes. So pretty easy to find as long as you make sure you spell it with green with an E on the end. Amazon, they're available as ebooks. So I'm pretty easy to find. I quite like social media. That's where I send where I share all my writing memes. And all the books are available on Amazon or through chapters.
One of your books won an award. How did that come?
Yeah, Reborn won the Moonbeam Children's Book Award. It actually tied for gold. There's a gold and a silver and a bronze in each category in the YA category, YA fantasy. So because I never won an award before, I actually went down to accept the award. It's quite an adventure in itself. Got stranded outside of Chicago because of the storm and the weather, because maybe November isn't the best time to go collect an award. But it was so nice to be able to pay tribute to the book, and the all the work that goes in behind it. So it was quite nice to get that.
What words of encouragement you would like to give to individuals who are authors, or if they want to become an author?
Just start writing. Write a story that you want to read because you're going to edit it a billion times anyway. But you can't follow the market because by the time the you come along, the market's going to have changed. Just find a story that you want to tell, that you have the passion to tell, that you can tell, um, and that you got to see it through, and that it's going to start off, and it's your first draft's going to be crap, and possibly your second and your third and your fourth. But if you are dedicated to your story, just keep at it, and really think more about the story, the characters. The themes will come. I know a lot of people that start with the themes and they want everyone to be thinking about this big theme or this, they want this message to come across. And you can't really start there. You have to start with the character and what's going to happen to them. And then as you write and as your characters go through whatever journey they're going through, that's where your themes come from. And you might have them in your head as you start, but chances are you'll get to the end and be like, huh, I really wrote about that and I didn't even know it. So just start writing, find a good story and tell it.
Is it easier to write a fiction book versus a nonfiction book? Which one you think is easier to write in your opinion?
Ugh, I have no idea. I I'm gonna go fiction. I've tried to write some stories that are very true to my life, and those never succeed because I need that distance. So I have a feeling writing a biography, an autobiography, a nonfiction on any topic. I don't know. Not for me anyway. It would be hard. I don't even write historical, so I'm gonna go with fictions. More fun. I don't know. Seems hard to write nonfiction.
Yeah, I mean that is kind of a hard question to answer, but I like to ask it anyway, because the answers are kind of unique, and I think people really need to know that. Also, a lot of the authors that I talk to, have written books that have a little bit of spin on their own personal lives. Can we say this? Can I say the same thing about you?
Oh, absolutely. And but you don't always know it when you're doing it. A lot of Reborn has to do with, my mom and her illness and her passing, but I didn't know that while I was writing it. It's only when you're editing it or when it's published and you start to talk about it and you're like, "Oh, wow, that part of my life went into that." You very rarely know it at the time. You might have a character or two that you kind of found a nugget of inspiration from, but a lot of the pieces of you that are going into it, you don't. Oh, that is a cat sneeze coming from my left. Did you hear that? Um, but you don't really know until when you're in it. It's usually later when you reflect back.
So when so as writers, we're not really like overthinking that, because I think that happens. Our brains start to crash, and we get writer's block and all sort of things. It's kind of like, my opinion. So you just kind of just go with the flow, and everything else will come out later. Or
Eventually.
maybe, right, or maybe like if you start getting reviews, from your book, that, for example, that you may begin to, see yourself in your writings from based on the reviews, that have a get. I seen that in art, book authors, and and they would tell me, that, but they're not really super concentrated on, trying to base their writings, on themselves. They just free flow. I like to call it free flow. To where you just write whatever's in your heart, whatever's on your mind. You just go with it. So, and I think that that's easier to do in fiction, than in nonfiction. Because in nonfiction you have to do a lot of research. So lot of research involved. So yeah, I get that. So you are not as creative, as you would like to be, but you can put a little bit of your personality, and so that's just like a podcast, you know, a lot of podcasters, they put their spin and their personality, into it. And so, of course, this one is, no different. Uh, Anything else you would like to add?
Just that every story takes its own journey. I mean, there could be one you try and write and you're not ready or it's not ready. So just put it aside and find something else. I have a story I worked on all last year and it just wasn't coming together. And I have a standing spot with my editor for every September. So I'm like, okay, I have to give her a manuscript or I'm gonna have to wait a whole nother year. And this one wasn't going to be ready, and so I didn't force it. I just said, you know what, I need a break from it, and I whipped up this little children's book, sent it to her. She edited it. It's already got a publisher. It's crazy how things work, that you can try and work on this for so long, and it's just, I have one that's been shopped around to publishers for 2 years. Ain't no one want it. But you never know. Maybe in a year, the market will change, and what people want will change, and it'll be a bestseller. You never know. So just know that every book is going to take its own journey. Writing it is going to be different. I used to be a plotter, then I was a pantser. Now I'm somewhere in between. It's okay for your writing style to change, your writing habits to change. Every book's got its own journey.
Right. And no book is alike. I know that sometimes that, as writers, we are compared with, with other writers. Like, for example, when I first started writing poetry, uh, they compare my writing to Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Oh, I love Emerson.
Mm. Saying that, his writing was direct, it was thought provoking, and sometimes are taken to, a place that would make you feel uncomfortable, like somewhat of a dark place, and I think, for some writers, everything's been bottled up for so long. When it comes out explosive and sometimes spectacular. And that's how you get a lot of these, uh, may not be bestsellers, but you get a lot of books that are thought provoking. Um, Obviously your series, is definitely thought provoking. Um, Jenna, I want to thank you for being on the program today.
Thank you for having me. It was great to talk.
Yeah, absolutely. And normally we don't do artists, on the works. Sometimes we do, but here anything goes. Uh, we love to hear, individual stories, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. Sometimes that may help people, with their own struggles and to deal with their own, struggles. So we kind of like incorporated that into the podcast, as well. So basically, just about anything goes, here. We want to have a safe place to where people can share their story without, judgment. But a lot of people, whether you know me or not, uh, I'm big on transparency and I'm big on accountability. If I hear something that is worthy of accountability, I would call that person out, you know, and I would do it. I would do it on my podcast. I would call that person out. But on the other side of the coin, I try to be as supportive, as I possibly, can. We don't want to be, one-sided to where, we're leaning, one way. So we kind of want to be open-minded, And so, that's why we talk about a variety of topics. This is a general interest show. It basically speaks for itself, just to kind of give you an idea of who we are and what we do here. And okay, and every person that we had on the show for the last 5 years had definitely brought their own flavor, their own personality, their own style. That's what really the ingredient that make podcasts work. And it also has something to do with the personality of the podcaster. So there's a lot of ingredients to making this work. And so that's kind of like my little disclaimer for today. We normally don't often do that, but every now and then you gotta kind of remind the audience of, who you are and what you stand for. So that's very important. But other than that, we just let people go. Everyone has a truth, everyone has a story. And this one is of no different. Thank you so much for being a part of the show. Hope that you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks
And
for having me. It's Thanksgiving weekend here in Canada, so
Thanksgiving weekend. Oh, okay. I didn't know that y'all have a different Thanksgiving period, than here in the United States. Ours is always on the last Thursday of the month. So
ours
that's
close around October, but so I got a lot of turkey to eat tomorrow.
Oh wow, that's great. That's great. Wouldn't it be great if you can celebrate Thanksgiving in Canada in October, and then at the end of the month you come here to the States, and you get to relive the tradition all over again. That would be great. It's kind of like your birthday is on Christmas Eve, and then the next day you celebrate Christmas. It's kind of like you get double the presents, double the money, cash out me twice. It's really fun. Okay, we're going to end here, and we got a great program for you next week. As always, we always have an exciting guest to come on every week, and these programs will be presented on Facebook, YouTube, Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, all your favorite podcast platforms. So if you miss this presentation, you'll have an opportunity to listen to it on demand. So, and our library is growing and our audience is growing. And we have people from all over the world that comes on here, and people from all over the world are beginning to listen to our podcast. So if you can, please go on Facebook at Australia Broadcast Section. There we will be posting our podcast and on YouTube is OBS International is our YouTube channel, where you'll also find our broadcast. And right now we are getting close to about 3,000 subscribers. So that's pretty good. 3,000 subscribers. So our content is growing, and we thank you so much for subscribing. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors. And of course, you can reach out to me on social media if you want to be a guest. We're always looking for guests to be on the show. And that would do it here for The Works. I'm Keith Williams, your host. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.